Hello, Taylor Elwood here, and welcome to today's episode of the Sovereign Submission podcast. Today, I'm going to explore the question of, can I be a submissive if I top someone? Welcome, Paul and Sheena. Glad to have you both here. So, when I talk about this question, really comes up because there's two frameworks we need to look at here around submission. One is a framework that's known as topping from the bottom. And then the other framework is known as service topping. So let's talk first about what topping from the bottom looks like. And then we'll look at the other. And if you have questions or comments as I'm sharing this information, feel free to drop those in the comment area. I love responding to your comments and your questions. So when I talk about topping from the bottom, I'm talking about a dynamic where the person who is the submissive is basically trying to control the dynamic by telling the top or the dominant what to do. But they'll do it in a way where it's kind of sneaky and kind of passive aggressive and things along those lines. So it might be, an example of that might be, for example, like where it's like, oh, okay, I want you to wear this outfit and do these activities to me because and you're essentially trying to tell them what you want them to do and when you want them to do it. That would be topping from the bottom. If you're submitting or surrendering in a very real sense, what you're doing is you are acknowledging that you may share your wants and your desires with somebody, but you are surrendering them to that person. I think another example I'll give, which would probably be better, is like when a submissive feels resistant toward a dominant person. Like, the dominant is saying, like, hey, or the mistress or master or whatever. I'm going to go with mistress in this case because that's what we're all about here and not sovereign submission land. But she says, like, I want you to do this activity for me, or I want you to take care of this matter, or I want you to give me a list of things or something along those lines. And the submissive, instead of like saying, like, hey, there's something coming up here, what they do is they end up resisting it. They drag their feet, they procrastinate, they purposely don't do it. That would be another example of topping from the bottom. They're not being honest with themselves and they're not being honest with their mistress. Instead, what they're doing is they are operating from a place where they're like, well, I'm going to say I want this thing, but I really, or they're going to say like, oh, I want to surrender to her. I want to submit to her, but I'm going to resist what she says because I don't really want to give her that thing, or I don't truly want to surrender or submit. And it might not even be that they don't truly want to surrender or submit. They very well might want to. But where the issue is coming up is that they're trying is they're not being honest with themselves about what they genuinely feel. And so it becomes one of those cases where they are essentially undermining the dynamic through that resistance. Welcome, Brendan and Mav. Glad to have you here. Again, if any of you have questions or comments, feel free to drop those in. I am more than happy to answer them. So that's an example of topping from the bottom. Now let's talk about service topping. Service topping is where you're a submissive, but your mistress has basically said, I want you to show up in a very specific context for me. And this is going to be your form of service to me. I'm still in control. But if somebody were looking at it from the outside, they might think that you were actually in control or you were the one who is being the dominant or whatever else. And it's one of those cases where this can take several different forms. It can take shape in the bedroom, for example, and I'm gonna share a good example of this. But it can also take shape in just the everyday dynamic. Now, if you live a 24/7 dynamic, that means that you're always going to be submissive in the dynamic, regardless of what's going on, whether you're in the bedroom or not. But even if it's in the bedroom, you can still have this dynamic at place. So in the bedroom, the example that I'm going to share is, and this is something that I talked it over with my mistress, and she said that she felt comfortable with me sharing this. Was an example where we were playing one time where we were switching back and forth in terms of topping and bottoming. Now, on the surface, again, it would look like we were just switching. I was sometimes I was paddling her or spanking her or using other toys on her. And sometimes then she would take over and end up using toys on me. But here's the thing, the entire time she was the one in control. I was I was switching with her when she wanted me to switch. And whenever she wanted to take back control, she took control. She might occasionally allow me to have control, but even then, it was for her pleasure. It was always about focusing on her pleasure as part of this dynamic. And of course, it gave me pleasure to service her. That's an example of service topping, where I was servicing her in more ways than one because it brought me a deep joy to give her that service. But she was nonetheless in control of that experience. She decided when we switched. And I might pick out different toys and play along those lines, and yet nonetheless, she would still know that she could stop it at any time. Whereas if I was the one if she was topping me at the time, it didn't necessarily mean that I would get that say in the same way. And of course, that can be a fun little dynamic to play with in the bedroom. There's other examples, but that's the one I'm going to share and here. What I will say about that in regards to service topping from the bedroom, and I liken this because I had a really good conversation one time with a dominant where we were talking about this for an interview, and he said, like on the you could from the outside you'd look and you would think that he was in control because he was doing the various activities that he was doing, and she was the one receiving them. But if she's the one who's in control, she's deciding that she wants to receive them, and she's deciding what it is that he's doing, and he is paying so much attention to what she wants and focusing in on her pleasure and everything else, bringing that to her as a form of service. I think that's a good way to look at it. Then the other example I'm going to use that I think applies in everyday life to this kind of dynamic is as a service top. One of the things that one of the requests, or rather, really not even a request. I mean, my mistress has basically said, "I need you to be the riverbank to my river." What does that mean? It means that sometime that she expects me to speak up and call her in if there's something that's going on that needs her attention. So, for example, let's say that she's having a day where she's feeling like really stressed or out of sorts. If I don't say anything, I'm not actually servicing her or serving her. Whereas if I say to her, "Hey, I think you're working a bit too hard and I think you need to take a nap or go for a walk," or something along those lines, what I'm doing is I'm giving her valuable information. What she does with that is up to her. She's the mistress. She's the dominant in this particular case. But what I'm doing is I'm bringing this information to her and she's receiving it. And this is one of the things that I think is often misunderstood in regards to dominance and submission, and even like this idea of service topping, is that in a very real sense, the dominant may be quote unquote in control, although keep in mind that the concept of control is really more based on consensual agreement. We've consented, we've agreed to have a particular relationship dynamic. But, and this is really important, one of the roles of the dominant is that they need to direct their attention outward toward paying attention to the submissive in terms of what the information that the submissive brings to them. Now, technically, the submissive isn't calling the shots. In a DS dynamic, what you're dealing with is a relationship where one person has agreed to give control over to the other person. And they've done this as a consensual agreement and arrangement. Now, this could, under the right circumstances, could be stopped at a certain time. It might be like, oh, if I say this word, it stops. Or we're doing this for the purpose of a scene. In a 24/7 dynamic, though, it's basically the idea is you're living it 24/7, and that's the dynamic I live in. It's really important to understand with this that nonetheless, if I bring information to her, I may be calling into her awareness something that she isn't seeing, that she's not spotting. And I'm doing this as an act of service. I'm not trying to top her from the bottom. This isn't about resistance towards something that she's, towards something she's given me a direction on. It's not me trying to say to her, you need to do this. Because at the end of the day, she's going to make the choice that she's going to make. What it is, though, it is bringing information to her so that she knows what she could do with that information. And a good example I'll liken this to is there's an episode of the Infinite Devotion podcast. If you're not familiar with Infinite Devotion, it's this guy named Andrew. He approaches it from the perspective of being a male dominant and his wife Dawn being female submissive. But he talks about the same thing. And one of the things that he says is that he's like, I expect that she's going to bring things to me because she's going to have information that I need to take in. I'm still the one making the decisions because that's what we agreed to, but she still is bringing me information, and it could be critical information that I need in order to help me make the best decision possible. And he used the example of they were checking out possible places to live. They went to this one area and she was just like, this doesn't feel good to me. This doesn't feel right. Now, as a dominant, he could have said, well, tough luck. We're going to live here. This is where we're going to go. This is, and she would have quote unquote submitted and surrendered because that's the agreement they have. But what he did is he took that information in and he recognized that there was something important there. And he made a decision that was based on recognizing that as a dominant, it was his role, and his role was important to make the decision that was best for both of them. She was trusting him to do that. Part of that trust was bringing information to him. So when we talk about service topping, I think that's an important element. Like the information that we bring in the relationship matters. Now, if you're a submissive man, it's really important that you're clued into this awareness for yourself. One of the scenarios that I see happen with submissive, whether men or women, is there will be this particular attitude like, I should keep what I want and need to myself, or I should keep everything to myself. My role is just to serve and service this person. And I don't think that's a form of healthy submission at all. That's not actually serving or servicing your mistress at all. You are keeping vital information away from her that might be needed. So it's important to ask yourself from a place of surrender and submission, what is it I need to bring to her? For example, I will bring things to my mistress where I'll share some things that are going on in my life at the time. We're in a long distance relationship, so it's actually vitally critical for her to know that information. She's not on the ground with me most of the time at this point in time. So she's not there to see what's going on in my life every single day. If I don't bring things to her, it makes it hard for us to develop to allow this dynamic to go even deeper. This is really a matter of trusting myself so that I trust her. When I trust myself and I speak up, it says to her, "Oh, he trusts himself enough to bring this to me. Now I can decide what I'm going to do with this information and how I can best help him out." So it's a really important thing to remember in regards to this concept of service, service by topping. Now, at the same time, one thing I want to be clear about is like, if you're a submissive watching this, is don't let this go to your head and think, aha, now I know how to switch the dynamic around or get what I want, because that's where you're going back to topping from the bottom. If you're using service topping as an excuse to quote unquote try to control or manage her or manage the relationship, fundamentally what you're trying to do is change the dynamic. And at that point, then just be honest and have the conversation with her and say, look, this either isn't working for me, or I'm feeling some surrender, or some resistance, excuse me, or something else is going on here and we need to talk about this and address it. And that's where then, like, maybe temporarily what you do is you put the dynamic to the side and the two of you have a conversation and you say, like, here's what's going on in the relationship, or here's where I'm feeling challenged, or something like that. Or, and even then, the dynamic may not entirely be put to the side, but it may be a matter of like, let's really look at this. So it's very important to walk that line carefully. You know, the other thing I'm going to kind of speak to here is, there is this notion with dominance and submission that, like, if someone is dominant, their attention is always directed outward toward the person who is submissive. And if someone is submissive, their attention is always directed inward toward themselves. I think that this is an example of somewhat inaccurate categorization. Welcome, Ray. Glad to have you here. And so here's what I mean by that. Sometimes my mistress's attention is definitely going to be inward. That doesn't mean that she suddenly stopped being the mistress. But her attention might be turned inward because that's what's bringing her the most pleasure and enjoyment in the moment, like with the example I shared when we were playing and we were switching back and forth. When I was the one topping her through service, yes, her attention was turned inward. It was very much about her pleasure and enjoyment, and that was what we both wanted. And nonetheless, she still had enough awareness to know when she wanted to switch things around. She was still very much in control of the dynamic. My attention was turned outward toward her because as a submissive, I wanted to pay attention to all of her cues, to what she wanted, both in terms of what she wanted in the moment and when she wanted to switch things up. So it's really important to recognize that we don't want to necessarily fall into this idea, like with a dynamic. Well, if I'm a dominant, my attention always has to be outward. Guess what? You're dominant. Sometimes your attention is going to be turned inward. Sometimes it needs to be turned inward because you need to do some self care for yourself, or you need to be aware of what's going on with you. You get to do that. It's really important to have that as a healthy for a healthy relationship. And sometimes as a submissive, your attention's gonna be directed outward. And it may be that it's directed outward because you're like, "Oh, here's what I need to notice. Here's the here's the critical information that I need to bring to her so that she's aware of what's going on." That may be one reason. It may be another reason altogether. Like when I'm driving on the road, for example, and I am like when we're together, I typically am driving, because that's something that she wants me to do, and it's a form of service to her. My attention is mostly focused on the road. I mean, I'm talking with her, of course. I'm paying attention to what she's saying, but I'm not looking over at her the entire time or anything like that. Like, I'm focusing on the road, right? Because if I'm not being a safe driver. I'm not being of service to her. I'm not being in service to the other drivers on the road. I'm not being of service to myself. So it's important to recognize these things and to really recognize that when we look at a given dynamic, there is going to be this flexibility around like where the attention goes. And yet nonetheless, the overall container is one where, like, as for me as a male submissive, what am I doing? I am surrendering to her. I am submitting to her. And not from a place of nice guy people pleasing. Let's be very clear about that. I'm surrendering as a conscious choice. This is an act of empowerment for me. And it's empowering her from under. This is one of the phrases that we use, empowerment under, because I am choosing that. Now, Sheena just said, especially as a woman in an FLR, there are times we have to be inward in order to lead overall. Yes, exactly. And here's the thing, the way that a woman leads in a relationship is different from the way a man leads in a relationship. I see, I see all this messaging out there from most of the men coaches, whether it's on Instagram or Substack, where it's like men need to lead, and women want to be led. Well, some women want to be led. Not all women want to be led. Let's be very clear about that. But the way that a woman leads does not automatically mean that she's in her masculine. She leads from the feminine, and really, this concept of masculine leadership has not always been the case historically. There have been matriarchies, there have been other societal focuses, and there still are. There's a saying in oh, that one movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where she's like, "He's the head, but we're the neck, and the neck turns the head." Female leadership may be very subtle. It may be it shows up in a different way. It can come in the form of guidance and direction, and yet nonetheless, it can be very powerful. And masculine leadership can also be powerful in its own way. And I say this as somebody who, outside of this DS dynamic, I definitely show up as a leader, both in the men's work community and in the magical community and in all the other places where I am definitely, out there in the world doing the things that I'm doing. And yep, even my leadership comes from a place of service. I definitely ascribe to the concept of servant leadership. If you're not familiar with that, it is a style of leadership, but it is very much based on the idea of being of service to the people around me and to the community in order to lead. In the context of the relationship dynamic that I'm coming in or that I'm in, my act of service to her, as I said, sometimes is that I speak up and share what's going on or that I point something out. And that's something that she's made very clear she wants from me. Even if she didn't want it from me, I would speak up because I wouldn't be servicing her or serving her. And that wouldn't be topping from the bottom. That's just me saying, like, hey, if there's something going on here, I'm going to speak up because that's just an important thing to do. Now, how I speak up matters too. And I want to be clear when I say how I speak up, I mean that, I'm always going to approach this approach it from a place of respect. If we didn't have that agreement in place, I would, definitely would have said to her, like, look, we need to have some kind of agreement. There needs to be some understanding here that if something comes up, I need to be able to speak to it. And I recommend that. Like a healthy DS dynamic has communication protocols in place that are clearly stated and understood by all people involved. It is not a healthy relationship if one person can't speak up. And or one person's expected to sublimate their needs and wants to the point that they can't like say like, hey, there's something going on here that's really bothering me or something like that. That's not healthy if you can't do that. It's really important to have a healthy, strong communication. That's what makes these relationship dynamics work. Because if it's something that you genuinely want, if you're like, yeah, that's the kind of lifestyle I want to live, you better believe that you've got to use your words at some point or another. The point being that like this is a really important thing to understand. Like when we are topping from the bottom, we're not topping at that point, we're not serving, we're not coming at it from a place of service, we're coming at it from a place of ego. We're coming at it from a place where we're actually trying to control the dynamic in the relationship. We're not honoring the relationship. We're not honoring the choices that we made. We're operating from an unconscious power dynamic. And if we're operating from a place of service topping, we're very aware of the power dynamic. We're very aware of the choices that we've made from a place of consensus, and that's where we're operating from. So I hope that this little conversation has made these concepts really clear. And if you are a male submissive, I want you to know that it is really important to be aware of these things. One of the earlier today, I actually just finished recording a mini course called Self Care for Submissive Men. And it really just kind of walks through the importance of taking care of yourself and like what that looks like. Part of that self care really involves the importance of understanding how you are showing up in the relationship and what it means to you to be in this dynamic. Don't take it for granted. There are over on FetLife, I saw this. It was interesting to kind of look at this. There was a conversation or a post I was reading, and the woman who wrote it was sharing like how one of the things that she found really frustrating was that a man would say that he wanted to submit or surrender, but then like what he would do is he would say that, and then he would promptly share everything he wanted her to do to him and expect her to do it on the spot. That's not genuine submission. That's him topping from the bottom. That's him trying to control the relationship. And what does it do? It causes her to dry up. It causes her to withdraw. It causes her to be like, well, you clearly didn't want this. Get clear on why you want to submit. Get clear on what it means to you. And let me be very clear here. If you're a man watching this, being submissive does not make you less of a man. Anyone who tells you otherwise probably has some work to do on themselves. Submission is one of the strongest things that you could possibly do. It is a deep form of trust and respect, and it comes with a lot of responsibility. Being able to submit and surrender your desires and needs and wants to somebody else and to trust them takes a lot of strength. It takes a set of balls, let me tell you, because it is something where you are really trusting that person, but also yourself. And I think a lot of times when we get into performative masculinity, where we're like, oh, we have to live up to a certain image of masculinity in order to feel like we're, like if we don't perform this particular role, then we're not going to be treated as men. Really, what's happening at that point is that we're engaged in a dynamic that is very poisonous in relationship to the men around us. We're judging them, and we're judging ourselves. This is one of the reasons why I work with submissive men, because we submissive men, we need this space where we are truly supported. We need to know that we can be comfortable in our masculinity, and that part of being comfortable in our masculinity is the choice to surrender and submit. So, I hope now that you have a clear understanding, as I said, of the difference between topping from the bottom and service topping. If you have any questions or comments, you can definitely leave them below here, below in the comments, whether you're watching this later on Substack or you're on YouTube. And one thing I will share for people, if you are curious or want to learn more, is you can grab my free sovereign submission relationship guide. And that will kind of walk you through some mistakes that submissive men make when they're first getting into this dynamic, that can easily be avoided and worked through when they have the right support systems in place. And Sheena said it's an important distinction. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sheena. I appreciate it. And to all of you, thank you for showing up here. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to sharing more with you again soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day.